All right, folks. We continue in the 25th letter, as we mentioned yesterday, opening of this letter. This is a letter that the Alter Rebbe is refuting those sages, actually, not just, not ignorant people. You might think that they are once you understand the Alter Rebbe's teachings. But the Alter Rebbe's teachings, the depth and profundity, is very nuanced and was very avant-garde in its time and even today, as we will learn. So, what we're trying to understand is the concept of two things that occur. Something that hurts you by another person, and yet the fact that it was meant for you. So is that person responsible? Even though there was a decree from heaven that some ill should come your way. So we explained two things, 2 points. One is God gave permission that ill should come, and just parenthetically, the ill is not meant because, God hates you. It's out of love, as we've learned previously in letter 11 and more recently in, I forget which letter now, in the 11th letter. And we learned in the first part of Tanya likewise. So rather in Igeres HaTeshuvah, the third part. In any case, so it's not coming out of a spiteful place or, retribution. It's coming out of love. But that's not the issue over here. The question is about us, not about God's intent, but how are we dealing with it when someone verbally abuses me, someone hurts me physically, someone does damage to my property, to my things. So the Alter Rebbe says that, well, that's, quoting from the sages, that's a decree from heaven. That's a decree from heaven. It was meant to happen. And if it was meant to happen, therefore, you don't get angry. Furthermore, the very power of the person to be able to do it is a power that God gives. I don't have the power to open up my mouth to say words of Tanya. God gives me the power. God gives me the power. I don't have the power to pick up my arm, to stretch to give out tzedakah, or, God forbid, to use an arm for the opposite, for something of an opposite nature. God gives the power. So that we need to understand more in depth this concept. At the same time, the person is at fault, as we explained yesterday, for their ill choice. Just because there was something painful that was meant to come to a person, you don't have to be the agent. If you choose to be the agent, you're responsible for that. God has many agents on how to bring the decree from heaven that could be painful down here on earth, and pain isn't bad. You have a toothache, that's actually a good thing. It's painful, but it's a good thing. Why is it a good thing? Because if you didn't have a toothache, what would happen? You wouldn't take care of the tooth, and you'd lose your teeth. So if you put your hand on fire, it's painful. That's a good thing. You know why? Because if it wouldn't be, then you wouldn't remove your hand from the fire, and, well, you wouldn't have a hand. So pain doesn't equal bad. Pain is pain. We don't like it, of course, but The point, though, is that it was a decree from heaven. The perpetrator didn't have to choose. The fact they chose, they're responsible for. But the Alter Rebbe is saying two things. One, in yesterday's class, permission is granted from heaven to bring this painful thing to another, and of course, and parenthetically, that's your choice. You don't have to be the agent, but even the power to raise your hand, God forbid, to hit somebody, to hurt somebody, to verbally abuse somebody, to curse someone, that is from heaven. I mean, that is a power from heaven. Now let's understand that further. And with this, we're going to come across an amazing idea. That the greatest miracle that ever existed is what? What is the greatest miracle? This goblet, splitting of the sea, the 8 wonders of the world. What is the greatest miracle of all times? All right, let's understand. So the Alter Rebbe, in today's class, quotes from the Baal Shem Tov, based on a verse in Tehillim, in chapter 119, that says, "Le'elam divorcha nitzav b'shamayim." Forever, your word, God, stands firm in the heavens. In other words, the words Vayhi Rakia, which is on the second day of creation, Baal Shem Tov explains, is the creative utterance, let there be a firmament, is constantly sustained enclosed in the heavens above, and is that utterance that is the vitality and brings into existence heaven itself. It sustains it. Now this is different than philosophers, Jewish philosophers of Judaism, sages, who deny divine providence, individual divine providence. In other words, God controls the world, of course. But to what extent is there the control? So they explain as follows. He controls the big stuff. He has his eye on the big things. The small things are of no consequence. It's beyond that. The Alter Rebbe says they're making a false analogy. They are creating God in human image. What's the human image? Human image is a craftsman makes this silver goblet. When it's finished, I'm in control of it now. I let go of it. I'm in control. I could put it here, I could put it there. But once I put it down, it's independent of me. It'll stay there. Now, of course, big times, big important things, auspicious moments, I'm going to move it because it should be over here on the other side, right? But for the small moments, it just stays there. It's independent. That's how a craftsman makes a piece of, an artisan makes the goblet. Now, that makes perfect sense for a craftsman. But how could you look at God and make him into the human craftsman? A human craftsman started with the silver, pretending that this is real silver, right? That becomes malleable, that they can now shape it and form it into this goblet. So the craftsman is only taking something and making something else out of it. And that's the way they feel God is too. He's taking something, and from that something, He's making a world. But just as the craftsman puts this down and may even remove himself, come back to it, and maybe move it here, only because, it's an important movement needs to be made with this goblet for the setup, generally. So therefore, where is the divine involvement? Only from time to time. Big events, splitting the sea, but regular day-to-day life, goblet, the world, is independent. It exists. It exists independent of its maker. That's how they look at creation. This is a huge mistake. Why? Because God didn't start with something. He didn't start with anything. All there was just him before creation. So he didn't form the appearance of something. He creates the world ex nihilo. Yesh mi'ayin, something from nothing. So, let's take the splitting of the sea. The splitting of the sea, there is a body of water that God made the easterly wind blow very strongly, that it split the sea. That's amazing. Especially the timing. Especially the timing. Exactly when the Jews needed it. Once they got through, and the Egyptians, the water went back, Egyptians, the Egyptians then drowned. So, amazing, great miracle. However, that miracle, God was taking something called water, whose nature is to flow, and now just changed its nature and made it stand like a wall. The moment the power of the easterly wind stopped, well, it went back to its original nature. So yes, it's a great miracle, but it's only a miracle of changing the nature of water, which, by the way, water sometimes can also stand like a wall. Ice cubes. Right? Okay, it wasn't ice, but so it just changed its nature because of the force of the wind. So it didn't flow, it stood like a wall. So that's a miracle, but it's still something from something. The existence of this goblet, the existence of me, the existence of a mere rock, the fact that it exists is because God is creating it through his utterance every moment that it should exist. And therefore, it is. The activating force must be constantly engaged in the goblet for it to exist. The moment the activating force of God, his word, let there be a goblet, let there be a kais, right, of the utterance, then it would cease to exist. It would go back to its original source, just like the original source of water is to flow. The original source of creation is before creation. What's that? Well, God. God in a manner that we have no experience of, no understanding of. That's why we call it nothing. It'd be nothingness. Nothingness from our understanding, our perspective, our experience. Absolute not. And that's why the Arizal says that even a rock has a soul to it. What's its soul? Is the force of God that animates it, engages in it at all times, that it should be existing. Not just that it should exist in the quality of what a rock is versus the quality of a goblet or the quality of human being, a quality of water, but that it should actually take space that it should be. Before creation, there was no space. There is no, before creation, there was no space. Parenthetically, I'd like to say something. I once saw a documentary of Stephen Hawking's. Great scientist. And it was about, does God exist or not? Is there a creator? And he goes back and forth with arguments. And finally comes back to the point, well, we know that once you go back in time far enough, there is no time. Well, if there is no time, that means there was no time for God to create the world. I scratched my head. I had to hear that a few times because I thought he was a genius. And maybe in science he is, but in intelligence, I question. What do you mean? There was no time for God to create the world because at one point there was no time. There was before time. Well, that's exactly the point. Time and space is a creation by God. So the space, physical space, is a novelty. And therefore, God is creating from beyond time and space, which we have no concept of. We have no understanding what that means because we live within time and space, within that framework. Therefore, we call it nothing. And from God's existence before creation, through his word, he brings into existence something from that nothing. Only God has that power. We can only take something, water, and we could make ice cubes out of it. So it's not flowing anymore. We could take silver and make a goblet. We could form and shape it. But we can't bring it into existence from nothingness. And nothingness doesn't mean here out of thin air, because air is something. Air, so like, the magic trick, out of thin, oh, look at that, out of thin air. Look what I was able to do. Ha! No, air is something. It's gaseous. So from energy, you can make matter. From matter can go back to energy. Right? E equals mc squared. We're way beyond that. Only God has that power. And it's a constant power within creation. Now, what's the point of this? Which we're going to go into later, but just think about it. If we ever have an incident with something, with someone, and we meditate upon this, that it was a very painful, difficult, painful, physically painful, emotionally painful, psychologically. But we recognize that God is animating this moment, something from nothing. It's not that God created this world and sort of let it go on its own, right? Like this goblet now is sitting there and I'm going to let it be, right? No. Constant engagement. So that means this moment, God is creating it. It's painful. It's a Kodak moment. What will happen? I'm not going to get angry. I'm going to have acceptance. I will try to allow it to recognize how this is a Kodak moment. Even if I don't understand it, you don't have to understand it. If you do get understanding how, that's great. But if you don't, it's not that important. More important is recognizing the fact of it. And therefore, the consequence of that is, I'm not enraged. I'm not angry. I'm not even upset at the pain. It doesn't mean you're not feeling pain. Someone steps on your toes, you feel pain. But does that mean you accidentally someone stepped on your toes? What are you're in rage? Pain doesn't equal anger. So when we think about this, oh my gosh, it's a game changer. This is a game changer on how we will respond and deal in our lives with a difficult situation, difficult people. We're only in the middle, by the way. I'm not even in the middle. This is only the second class. We've got it. Till, I think, mid-next week. Continuing it with this. Yeah, mid-next week. Because the Alter Rebbe is Chabad, Chachma Bina V'das. So he's going to bring us through the process to understand detail by detail. So we have a real clarity on the concept so that we can live with it in a very real way. That's where we're at. Folks, I hope this is meaningful to you. And if it's meaningful to you, strong suggestion, share it with others. Something is meaningful to you, you're gaining from it, and it's not shared. So either you're only thinking about yourself, or you might be a little, I'm sorry for saying this, embarrassed. I don't know. I see many of you do, but many don't. So I'm just trying to encourage, inspire that indeed you should share. All right, folks, I'm Rabbi Ronnie Fine, coming to you from Chabad Zurich and Kadesh in Montreal, Canada. It's a privilege and a pleasure to share with you the Tanya. Have a wonderful day.